Most people live their lives as if God doesn't even exist. And even those who profess to believe in God, or at least a higher being, live their lives and they make their choices based upon their own dreams and desires with no consideration of God. God is kind of there if they get in over their heads and they really need Him. He's kind of a deity to be thought of during Christmas and Easter, but He has little influence in the day-to-day stuff of life. That's just a foolish way to live. So James addresses that godless attitude as he writes, "Now listen, you who say today or tomorrow, we will go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business, and make money. Why, you do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes. All such boasting is evil. If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin for them." So in this section of James' letter, he imagines some small-town Christian business people who've experienced some success with their business. Their success has kind of gone to their head, and they start making bigger plans to make bigger profits. And they say, today or tomorrow, we'll go to this or that city. We'll spend a year there, carry on business, and make money. Now, on the surface, there's nothing wrong going on here. Business is not evil, and many successful businesses are owned and operated by Christians. Nor is making a profit in business evil. These aren't the points that James is making at all. Instead, James makes the point that God must not be left out of our plans. Whatever plans we make for our lives, they must be made under submission to God. It's just foolish to plan our lives without any regard to God. After all, we don't even know the future. James says, why, you don't even know what will happen tomorrow. And that's so true. We make plans for what we're going to do the next day, but often those plans are interrupted by more pressing matters. What we plan to do gets replaced by what must be done. So, most people think it'd just be the greatest thing in the world to know the future because it would give them this huge advantage. Back in the 80s, there was a very successful movie trilogy. It was the Back to the Future series starring Michael J. Fox in the prime of his popularity. In the movies, he played a teenager that could travel through time in a customized DeLorean. In the second installment of the series, Fox's character, Marty McFly, travels 30 years into the future to the year 2015. And Marty's son finds himself in trouble with the law, and so Marty travels to this distant time in order to save his son, who really hasn't actually been born yet, from being thrown in prison. So, by knowing the future, Marty McFly can fix things now, before it's too late. And that really is the appeal of knowing the future. If we knew what would happen decades from now, we might make different choices today. If we could see what the future holds for us, we could better prepare for it. And of course, there are those today who really think that they can actually know the future by consulting horoscopes or visiting a fortune teller. But that's just wishful thinking. The reality is, we can't see into the future. There is only so much we can do and so much we can know. We are finite beings. We have no superpowers to live forever and to peer into the future. We can't even know for certain what will happen during the next hour. And as hard as we try to slow down our aging process, the reality is that we can't stop it either. James asks, what is your life? That's actually a pretty deep question. Most people probably don't spend enough time contemplating the meaning of their lives. And James goes on to say, you are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. You are a mist. We really don't think much about mists, do we? If the weather forecaster predicted a light mist tomorrow morning, nobody's going to take that very seriously. We certainly wouldn't say, a mist is on the way. We better call our friends and warn them. We'll stay home from work and school tomorrow just to be on the safe side. I wonder if it's too late to call our insurance agent and get some more mist insurance. Mists are the weaklings of the weather world. They don't scare us. They don't even slow us down. They appear briefly and then just fade quickly into the morning sun. No one gives mists much thought. And so, when James compares our lives to a mist, he wants us to clearly see just how weak and temporary we really are. Even the person who has lived to a ripe old age has only lived a drop in the ocean of history. Time marches on, waiting for no one. And we try our best to prolong our years with healthy living, medicine, money, luck. But we can't prevent the inevitable. Time for all of us will someday run out. But since we don't know the future, we don't know if our lives are going to end in decades or days. And every day the news brings stories of people whose lives suddenly and unexpectedly come to an end. And so to boast about what will happen in our lives in the coming years, the places we'll go, the money we'll make, the successes we'll experience, is simply ridiculous. Manny Machado is a baseball player for the San Diego Padres. And he's had good success as a baseball player. He's considered one of the very best in the league. He makes more money hourly than the average American makes annually, so he's doing okay. Well, Manny was playing in a game against the LA Dodgers in July of 2019. And as he stood in the on-deck circle, he was being heckled by a fan. And the fan said that Manny will get the next 10 Octobers off. Well, the 10 years refers to the 10-year contract that Manny signed with the Padres, and October refers to the playoffs. So the fan was basically saying that the Padres wasted their money on Manny. Manny and the Padres will be sitting out of the playoffs for the next 10 years. Well, that got under Manny's skin. And so he chirped back at the fan. And he said, I bet you my contract will win a World Series before you guys do. Well, understand, Manny signed a 10-year deal with the Padres for $300 million. And betting $300 million that the Padres win the World Series before the Dodgers, that's quite a boast. It shows that Manny had extreme confidence in his ability and a razor-sharp understanding of the future. Or did he? Because as it turned out, the Padres were a very good team in 2020, but the Dodgers were the better team as they won the World Series. So Manny was wrong. He didn't know the future as well as he thought he did. In the end, his bet and his boast sounded very, very foolish. We simply don't know what the future holds. Jesus told the story of a man who boasted about the future. He was a rich man who experienced a great harvest. He had more crops than he could possibly use. And he had no place to store this great harvest. And so he said to himself, this is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. Well, what was this man's sin? It was not that he was rich. And it was not that he had a great harvest. It was that he boasted about all these big plans for the future that didn't include God at all. This is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns. I'll build bigger barns. I'll store up all my surplus grain. I'll retire. Well, Jesus continues his parable. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves but is not rich toward God. So God says that living our lives with no regard to Him is foolish. And yet that's how the vast majority of people in the world live today. It is much, much better to live our lives in submission to God. After all, we are finite, but God is infinite. James says that our lives are but a mist that appears for a while and then vanishes. In contrast, the psalmist describes God like this: before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the whole world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. God is from everlasting to everlasting. He's eternal, without beginning or end. We're quite limited in our vision. We see the way things are today and do what we can do to learn from history. But God isn't limited to the world as we see it. God isn't just an expert in history. He's an expert in life. If we really want to learn to live effectively, we should get in touch with and in tune with the author of life. A current trend is a thing called life coaching. And people who think they need to get their acts together may seek out a life coach for help. Well, I'm not an expert in life coaching, so I went to the website lifecoaching.com to see just what it's all about. There's a section on that site titled, "Here's what life coaching offers you." And 5 things are mentioned. It says, as your life coach, we'll help you discover what's really most important to you in your life. Then we'll help you design a plan to achieve those things. We'll work with you to eliminate any obstacles or blocks that stand in your way. We'll partner with you all the way to success. Then we'll celebrate with you. But here's the thing. All this discovering and planning and streamlining and partnering and celebrating is done without any mention of God. But that's how it is for most people. They seek happiness, fulfillment, direction, and success apart from God. If we're looking for a true life coach, we can't do any better than God Himself. Just think about it. Just suppose I decided to sign up to have my life coached by somebody so I could make better choices and live a better life. And seeking a life coach, do you think I would look for someone fresh out of high school who took a 6-week course on life coaching, got certified, and that was it? Of course not. He may have the certificate, but he hasn't lived life. He hasn't gained wisdom. I'd much rather consider a 50-year-old guy who has seen more and lived more and learned more. But if all that's true, then how much more we should put our hands, our lives, into God's hands. He's been around forever. He sees it all. He knows it all. And in His perfect wisdom, He is ultimately qualified to lead us through our lives. God knows the future. He knows our future. That doesn't mean He's going to spell it all out for us and reveal everything that's coming. But it does mean that nothing will catch Him off guard. He's there with us and He's there for us. There's an old song that my grandpa Hannah used to sing in church. And it says, "Many things about tomorrow I don't seem to understand. But I know who holds tomorrow, and I know who holds my hand." But God not only sees the future, God controls the future. God doesn't boast about what He might do. He promises what He will do. So it makes sense to put our life into the hands of an all-powerful God. It's sinful to live our lives as if God doesn't even exist. That's just not a sin of unbelievers. Many Christians seldom consult God in the day-to-day things of life. They live out their lives with dreams and desires that have little or nothing to do with God's kingdom. It's okay to plan for the future. When Paul went on his missionary journeys, he planned in advance. He planned where he would go and how long he would stay there. It only makes sense to make plans. But all of Paul's plans We're in submission to God. And as we plan, we must always include God, realizing that all our plans are subject to God's will. Our plans and our very lives are in God's hands. James said, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. So instead of making our own plans and then asking God to rubber stamp approve them, we need to deliberately seek God's will, allowing Him to lead us through life. After all, there is no better life coach than God Himself.